Joining me now in studio is Bishop Robert Barron, Bishop of the Diocese of Winona, Rochester, Minnesota, and a member on President Trump's Religious Liberty Commission. Thank you so much for coming into the studio.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
So can you tell us, why was this commission so important for people who are watching at home?
It's the first liberty, religious liberty. It's the first mentioned in the First Amendment, and it's basic to our democracy. And I think this commission focused on that a lot. We kept coming back to that basic insight. This is the first liberty. And if religious liberty is undermined, and we see that all over the place, you look at the history of the last 100 years around the world, when religious liberty is threatened, all the other liberties are threatened. And so we wanted to revive a sense of the founding fathers and the stress that they placed on it. And I thought it was really wonderful in light of the 250th anniversary of our country that we were hearkening back to the founding fathers. But that's why it matters, because it's the first liberty, and it's the keystone of all the other liberties.
Now, included in this is the report. Can you tell us what purpose that serves and also some of the key takeaways?
Well, the purpose of the report was to help the president. So we were formed to finally advise the president as to legislation or executive orders or other moves he could make to foster religious liberty. Our purpose was to listen to lots of witnesses, and we did. I think it's well over 100 people we listened to. In education, healthcare, in the military, we looked at anti-Semitism. We listened to scholars talk about the founding fathers. And the whole purpose was to determine to what degree religious liberty is being threatened in our country, and then what recommendations we could make to the president. So that's the purpose of the report. And I think that's important for our, republic. And I respect President Trump very much. He's the president in my lifetime who's done the most for the defense of religious liberty.
What are your thoughts that he was so open to having this commission and, of course, asking everybody to gather?
Yeah, I remember when I met him the first time when he was bringing this commission together, and I just said, Mr. President, thank you on behalf of all religious people. We're really grateful to you for this. In his own heart, I don't know for sure, people talk about a certain religious awakening in President Trump, especially in the second term, maybe after the assassination attempts. I don't know, but he seems to be sincerely dedicated to fostering religion, and he sees the importance of it to our republic. I think that's very clear. He spoke one time to our commission, so we met pretty much every month for the past year. He came in September, and he gave an address to the commission. And I think he spoke from the heart about his sincere dedication to this.
Now, of course, you listened to testimony. Were you struck particularly by anything that you had heard during all of those different hearings?
I was struck by a lot of it. I was struck by the courage of a lot of these people. And we listened to men, women, and children. There was a session on education, and we had kids come in from grade school kids to high school to university to, post-grad. I was struck by the courage of a lot of these people because their religious liberty really was threatened. Think of physicians and so on who are seeking conscience protection and not getting it. Think of people in educational settings where an ideology that's really repugnant to their religious faith is being foisted upon them. They're being forced either to teach it or to learn it, and are being threatened if they want to withdraw from that. And we heard the suffering they went through and jobs that were threatened and so on. So I was impressed again and again by the courage of these good people, and I'm glad they came forward. And we were an opportunity for them to express their concerns to the government.
The United States is so large, and of course, just state by state, very different. What advice would you give for some people who feel that they are experiencing religious persecution?
Speak out. And among the recommendations we make, we want education to happen so that the Justice Department can really be clear on what religious liberty means, what your rights are, what the separation of church and state does and doesn't mean. So part of that is educational. We also want to provide, one of the recommendations is a hotline, religious liberty hotline. A number of people could call if they feel their religious liberties are being threatened. We want people to bring, litigation if they can in some of these cases to press the issue. I think we want people to know that they have friends who will support them in their struggle for this right. Because often religious people would feel beleaguered. They say, well, they'd hear separation of church and state, and that's the end of the argument. And we are eager to say, well, no, it's the First Amendment of our Constitution, which is not about some strict wall of separation, but talks indeed about the free exercise of religion. See, and that's what we saw as threatened in many ways. The ability to exercise one's religious faith, not just privately, whispering convictions among fellow believers, but publicly. And we want people to know that that is a right they have as Americans. And if it's being violated, they should speak up and know they have friends.
How incredible is it to think back to the Founding Fathers and that they had made that such an important point?
They were geniuses, really. The fact that at that moment in history, you've got Washington and Adams and Jefferson and John Jay and Hamilton and Madison, they all came together. These people operating at a very high level. Think of Madison's formulation of the First Amendment, which is kind of an act of genius to say government ought not to be establishing religion. At the same time, it's not to interfere with the free exercise of it. To live in that space, that's what it means to be an American, to be a religious person in this country. And that's what we feel was being violated in some ways. But the Founding Fathers were ingenious on that point, and they took religious liberty with great seriousness.
When you look at culture and society today, do you feel a little bit hopeful in that politicians are speaking about God and religion, and we're seeing a lot of faith-based shows? I mean, is that giving you some hope that we are now able to embrace all of this?
Yeah, it does. And there's certainly a revival going on. There's no question about that. I've been tracing these numbers for a long time of the people disaffiliating from the churches. At least it slowed down, at least it was kind of plateaued, and there were some indications really of the numbers going back up. So that's all, I think, very much to the good. So I take hope from that. My concern culturally, and I raise it a lot at the commission hearings, I call it the culture of self-invention. That means I determine the meaning of my life. I determine who I am. It's all up to my freedom. Look at Casey versus Planned Parenthood. In my judgment, the worst decision made by the U.S. Supreme Court since the Dred Scott decision, or Roe v. Wade. But it belongs to the nature of liberty to determine the meaning of one's own life and of the universe. That was the claim of Casey versus Planned Parenthood. Well, that's a whole cultural view, right? That my freedom determines meaning. Well, that culture understands that its greatest enemy is religion. Because religion says, no, there are objective values, spiritual and moral values. And we're meant to conform our freedom to those values. And religion speaks that publicly, not just privately. And I think that's the fundamental cultural battle that's going on. And I think our commission was getting into the arena when it comes to that struggle. I think that's the primary opponent of religious liberty in our country.
So our viewers watch from across the country and around the world. What would you say to them? Because they too have a lot of these shared beliefs and want to see things obviously go in a better direction.
Don't be cowed by the claim that, well, separation of church and state, a wall of separation, therefore retreat into silence, retreat into privacy with your religion. I'd say, no, don't buy that. Go back to the First Amendment of our Constitution, right? We don't want an established religion. No one in our commission wants that. None of the Founding Fathers wanted that. They knew, by the way, the Founding Fathers, what an established religion meant. It was the religion of the country they were rebelling against. They didn't want that. But at the same time, the free exercise clause, right? The government shall make no move restricting the free exercise of religion. I would say to people, don't be cowed by a facile evocation of the wall of separation. That, of course, comes from Thomas Jefferson. It was a private letter he wrote. It's not in the Constitution, not in the Bill of Rights, not in the Declaration of Independence. So I would say move into the space opened up by those two clauses of the First Amendment, which are in a beautiful creative tension with each other. And don't be cowed by those who say in a facile way, wall of separation.
You discussed the unprecedented nature of the commission. How does it feel to be a part of history?
Well, I wouldn't overstate that. I enjoyed the year very much. I must say very honestly, the invitation came out of the blue. I remember a call came to me that the White House was looking for my phone number. And I thought, what have I done wrong? And then I was invited to be on the commission. I went into it probably with a little bit of intimidation, but I must say I enjoyed the sessions very much. We met, as I say, almost every month, and we heard from witnesses who were always very moving to listen to. And we had our own conversations. We would interrogate the witnesses. We talked through a lot of the issues. And I enjoyed the sessions, looked forward to seeing the people on the commission. So it was a good thing. I often say when people ask about this that I'm standing in a tradition opened up by Father Hesburgh last century, the legendary president of Notre Dame, who was on 16 different presidential commissions from the late 50s through the 1970s. So as he gave service, I think, to both the country and church, I felt that's what I was being called upon to do.
Well, having a seat at the table allows you to have a voice in the conversation.
Yes, and that's exactly how I saw it. Like, some people, from the beginning said, "Oh, you shouldn't do that, and churchmen shouldn't be involved, and you're going to be compromised." And I said, "Well, the President of the United States is inviting me as a Catholic bishop to be a voice around the table when policy is being formulated on a matter that we think is of signal importance. Why wouldn't I do that?" And I get it. People did say, and they always will say, "Well, now you're, compromised." But I never felt that. I never felt pressure from anybody. I felt I was listened to. My opinion was taken seriously, and I enjoyed these conversations. So to me, that's frankly a non-issue.
And while we have you here, we would love to hear some of your reflections on America's 250th.
Yeah, just before this interview, I was down at Mount Vernon. We're here an extra day in Washington, and I always love Mount Vernon. And I talked there. I did a couple of videos, and I talked about George Washington and religious liberty. Washington writes in 1790 both to Catholics and to Jews. He'd just been made president, and he told them, "I'm against bigotry. I'm against any religious prejudice, and you have a place in this country." And the First Amendment comes out 1791, the following year. And Washington's attitude toward religious people and religious liberty had a lot to do, I think, with the ratification of that amendment. Also, Thomas Jefferson. "We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights." Take creation and the creator out of that, the logic falls apart. And you can see that in situation after situation around the world, in the ancient world, the modern world. Take God out of the equation, equality will evenness, rights will disappear. I think precisely on this anniversary, as we celebrate that Declaration of Independence, the religious dimension, Fulton Sheen, soon to be Blessed Fulton Sheen, said the Declaration of Independence is at the same time a declaration of dependence upon God. Right. And I don't want that truth to be forgotten. And I think it's good on this anniversary year that we celebrate it.
Well, we appreciate all your work and everything that you have been here in studio discussing with us. Bishop Robert Barron, thank you so very much.
God bless you. Thanks.